there is a version of you that has never been activated. Not because the capacity was absent, but because the morning, that first window of conscious operation, has been squandered on noise, comparison, anxiety, and the residue of yesterday's unfinished assignments. Every single morning you open your eyes, a system comes online. That system is not casual. It is precision engineered. It was assembled with components that have no equivalent in any laboratory on this planet. And the manufacturer who designed it did not do so carelessly or without a specific output in mind. The tragedy is not that you lack ability. The tragedy is that you have spent years initiating that system with incorrect inputs and then wondering why the output fails to match the blueprint. Let me submit to you, most human beings are not living their design. They are living a reaction. They wake up and immediately plug into the frequency of other people's emergencies, other people's timelines, other people's panic. They open devices that were engineered to steal the most critical 12 minutes of their cognitive day, that morning window, when the prefrontal cortex is freshly online, when suggestibility is at its highest, when whatever information enters first will set the operating parameters for the next 16 hours. This is not philosophy. This is the architecture of how the human system actually functions. And when you fail to govern that window, you do not simply have a bad morning, you deploy a compromised version of yourself into a day that requires your full specification. You don't need motivation. You need revelation. Motivation is fuel that runs out. Revelation is a structural shift in how you understand what you are, what you carry, and what the manufacturer intended when this particular configuration of intelligence, memory, skill, and assignment was assembled. You were not put here to perform a version of someone else's function. You were designed with a specific output, and that output cannot be delivered by any other component in the system. But here is where the common error begins. Most people approach the morning as though it were a neutral zone. They believe the day simply starts. They do not understand that the morning is not a beginning. It is a calibration. Every precision instrument, every satellite navigation system, every aircraft guidance computer, every surgical robotic arm must be calibrated before it is deployed into operation. Calibration is not a luxury. It is not a ritual performed by overly cautious engineers who have too much time. Calibration is the process by which a tool is aligned to its intended function under current operating conditions. Without it, even the most sophisticated instrument will produce inaccurate output. An inaccurate output, when trusted, becomes a compounding catastrophe. You are a precision instrument. The manufacturer who assembled you did not build a generic model. You are a specific purpose design, which means you require calibration every morning. The 5 things you must tell yourself each morning are not affirmations in the conventional sense. They are not feel-good statements designed to manufacture artificial confidence. They are calibration commands. They are instructions issued to a system that without them defaults to its lowest operational setting, which is survival mode, fear-based scanning, and reactive function. When you wake in survival mode, you protect yourself from your own potential. When you wake calibrated, you extend yourself into your assignment. Now, let me correct the misunderstanding at the foundation of all of this. Most people who engage with morning declarations do so with the framework of motivation. They believe they are trying to feel better. They are pursuing an emotional state. And because emotions are volatile, transient, and entirely dependent on external conditions, their practice fails within weeks. They conclude that this kind of thing does not work for them. What they do not understand is that the failure was not in the practice. The failure was in the understanding of what the practice is actually for. Consider a manufacturing plant. Inside that plant, there are machines engineered to perform a single precise function. Those machines do not need to feel enthusiastic about the day's production run. They need to be aligned, lubricated, and loaded with the correct raw material. The calibration routine performed on those machines every morning is not an act of emotional restoration. It is an act of functional preparation. It answers 3 questions before production begins. Are all systems operating within specification? Is the input material correct? Is the output pathway clear? If any of those 3 questions produces a failed answer, the production run is halted. You do not run compromised machinery on a live production floor. The cost of that decision is too high. Now, apply that to yourself. The 5 things you tell yourself every morning are answering those same 3 questions in the most sophisticated system the manufacturer ever assembled. Are you operating within your design specification? Are you loading the correct input, identity, purpose, assignment? Is your output pathway clear? Meaning, are you free of the blockages of unforgiveness, comparison, and borrowed anxiety? When all 3 questions are answered correctly through deliberate morning calibration, the production output changes. Not because you feel better, not because the external conditions shifted in your favor overnight, because the system is running correctly, and a correctly running system always produces output consistent with its design. That is not hope, that is engineering. The first calibration command is this: I am not a product of my circumstances. I am a product of my design. This is not a motivational statement. This is a systems correction. The human mind, left uncalibrated, defaults to a circuit called circumstance-dependent identity. In this circuit, your assessment of what you are capable of, what you deserve, and what you can produce is constantly filtered through the lens of your current external conditions. If conditions are difficult, the system concludes that you are in a reduced state. If resources are scarce, the system concludes that production must decrease. This circuit is the single most destructive operating error in the human system, and it is almost universally active in uncalibrated people. Here is the parable of the diamond in the compression chamber. Deep within the earth, under conditions of catastrophic pressure and extreme temperature, carbon, the most common element in organic matter, undergoes a structural transformation. It does not transform because the conditions are favorable. It transforms because the conditions are extreme. The pressure is not destroying the carbon. The pressure is activating a structural potential that was already present in the molecular design. What emerges from that process is not damaged carbon. It is diamond, one of the hardest, most optically brilliant, most structurally sound materials in the known universe. The same carbon, the same molecular components, but an entirely different structural expression, catalyzed not by comfort, but by compression. Let me submit to you that your difficult circumstances are not evidence of a manufacturing defect. They are evidence of a manufacturing process. The manufacturer does not test components in optimal conditions. Optimal conditions produce no useful data. The manufacturer tests components under stress, under load, under the precise conditions that will be required for the component's actual operational environment. And a component that passes that test is not merely functional, it is certified. So when you wake tomorrow morning and the first thing your mind reports is a catalog of everything that is wrong, everything that is insufficient, everything that is threatening, you answer that report with precision. You do not argue with it emotionally. You correct it structurally. You tell yourself, I am not a product of my circumstances, I am a product of my design. And my design has already been certified for this operational environment. That is not bravado. That is systems intelligence. The second calibration command is, I have an assignment and it will not fulfill itself. This is where revelation becomes uncomfortable for most people, because the concept of assignment implies specificity. It implies that your presence here is not generic. It implies that there is a function you were designed to perform that cannot be performed by any substitute. And that is a weight that many people instinctively resist, because weight implies responsibility. And responsibility implies accountability. And accountability, in a world that has trained people to celebrate victimhood and outsource blame, is deeply unpopular. In precision manufacturing, every component in a complex system has a function, not a suggested function, a function. When that component fails to perform its function, even if it looks identical to the components around it, even if it is placed correctly in the assembly, the entire system is degraded. Consider the human body. There are approximately 37 trillion cells in the adult human body. Each cell carries the full blueprint of the entire organism in its nucleus. But each cell expresses only the portion of that blueprint relevant to its specific assignment. A liver cell does not attempt to perform the function of a cardiac cell despite carrying the exact same genetic instructions. It operates within its design specification. And because every cell honors its specific assignment, the organism functions at full capacity. The tragedy of human beings is that we have been given both the full blueprint and the freedom to choose our function. And overwhelmingly, we choose the function that requires the least resistance. We default to the expression of our blueprint that is most socially acceptable, most financially safe, most comfortable, and then we spend our lives feeling the hollow ache of a component that knows it is not performing its true function. That ache has a name. It is called purposelessness. And no amount of external success will silence it, because external success was never its cure. Alignment with assignment is the only cure. So every morning, the second calibration command reactivates the awareness of assignment, not as a burden, as a compass. A compass does not argue with you about direction. It does not motivate you. It simply points. You tell yourself, I have an assignment, it is specific, it is non-transferable, and it will not fulfill itself. This means I must show up fully today, not because I feel ready, but because the assignment does not wait for readiness, it waits for availability. The third calibration command is, I have dominion over my internal environment. Dominion is a word that has been misapplied for generations. Most people, when they hear the word dominion, think of external authority, the power to control circumstances, other people, outcomes. And because external control is largely an illusion, the concept of dominion feels like a promise that the observable world consistently contradicts. But this is a misreading of where dominion actually operates. Let me submit to you that your primary territory of dominion is not the world outside you, it is the world inside you. It is the governance of your thought systems, your interpretive frameworks, your emotional architecture, your response patterns. These are the territories over which you have been given genuine authority, not partial authority, full authority. The manufacturer did not design you to be a passive recipient of internal weather. You were designed with executive function, the capacity to observe your own mental processes and redirect them. That is not a metaphor. That is a neurological fact. Here is the parable of the thermostat. In any climate control environment, there are two types of objects. There are thermometers and there are thermostats. The thermometer is a responsive instrument. It measures the current temperature and reports it faithfully. It has no capacity to alter what it measures. It can only reflect conditions. The thermostat, by contrast, is a governance instrument. It measures current conditions, and then if those conditions fall outside the specified range, it activates the systems necessary to restore the environment to the set point. Same building, same external conditions, entirely different relationship to those conditions. Most people are living as thermometers. They measure the emotional and circumstantial temperature of their environment, report it accurately, and are entirely governed by what they measure. A calibrated human being operates as a thermostat. They measure current conditions. They compare those conditions to their internal set point, which is their design specification, their assignment, their identity. And when conditions fall below that set point, they activate the governance systems to restore alignment. Every morning, the third calibration command activates your thermostat function. You tell yourself, I have dominion over my internal environment. What happens outside me today will be processed through my governance systems. It will not be permitted to set my frequency. I set my frequency, and I set it in alignment with my design. The external world does not have jurisdiction over your internal operating state. It has influence only to the degree you surrender governance. This is not a declaration of invulnerability. This is a declaration of jurisdiction. The fourth calibration command is, I am loaded with components that have not yet been fully deployed. One of the most disorienting experiences a human being can have is the sense that they have reached their ceiling, that the current output represents the maximum production capacity of the system, that what they have expressed so far is approximately what they have. This is not an observation. This is a calibration error. And it is devastating in its consequences, because a system that believes it has reached capacity stops initiating new processes. Here is what the data reveals. The human brain contains approximately 86 billion neurons. Each of those neurons can form up to 10,000 synaptic connections with other neurons. The theoretical number of possible connection states in a single human brain exceeds the number of atoms in the observable universe. That is not a poetic estimate. That is a mathematical extrapolation based on known biological architecture. The system has not been fully mapped by its own operators. The manufacturer installed processing capacity that no single human lifespan has come close to exhausting. The limitation is not in the equipment. The limitation is in the calibration. There is also the matter of skill compression. Every skill you have ever been exposed to, every experience you have moved through, every system you have navigated, every problem you have solved, all of it has been stored, cross-referenced, and architecturally integrated into your component inventory. Most of that inventory is sitting in dormancy, not because it is inaccessible, but because you have never issued the instruction to access it. The morning calibration command of component awareness is the instruction to your system that the full inventory is available today, not just the frequently used tools, the entire warehouse. This is why people frequently discover new capacities during crises. The crisis issues a demand that the standard operating toolkit cannot meet, and the system is forced to search deeper into the inventory. And invariably, it finds something, always. Because the manufacturer does not install components that are inert. Every component in you has a function. Every experience that formed you produced a tool. Every difficulty that refined you generated a capacity. You are more equipped than your recent history suggests. The fourth calibration command makes that true in the operational sense, not just the theoretical one. You tell yourself, I carry components that have not yet been fully deployed. Today may be the day one of them is called upon. I am ready. The fifth calibration command is, the blueprint for my life is intact. The issue with most morning practices is that they are performed from a position of doubt. The individual recites words while simultaneously running a background process that questions whether those words are true. This is the equivalent of loading a program while simultaneously running a scanner that flags the program as a threat. The installation never completes. The system remains in conflict. And the individual concludes that the practice does not work, when in fact the practice was sabotaged by the internal architecture that was never addressed. The fifth calibration command attacks the root of that internal conflict directly. The blueprint for your life is intact, not was intact, not will be intact. When circumstances improve, it's intact right now, in its current state, despite what has gone wrong, despite what has been lost, despite the gap between where you are and where you intended to be at this point in your timeline. The blueprint is intact. Here is the parable of the flood damaged structure. A building that sustains significant water damage presents a terrifying picture to the untrained eye. Structural elements appear warped. Interior systems are visibly compromised. The evidence suggests that the structure is a total loss. But a structural engineer walks into that same building and performs an entirely different assessment. The engineer is not examining the finishes. The engineer is examining the load-bearing elements, the foundation, the primary structural members, the connections between core systems, and in most cases, even in buildings that appear catastrophically damaged, the structural blueprint is intact. The damage is real, but the foundation holds, and a structure with an intact foundation can be rebuilt, reconfigured, and returned to full function. You are that structure. The life events that have damaged you, the years that produce outcomes you did not intend, the relationships that left structural marks, the failures that altered your trajectory. These are not evidence that your blueprint was destroyed. They are evidence that you lived through real conditions. The blueprint resides in your foundation, and your foundation is your design, the specific combination of capability, purpose, assignment, and intrinsic identity that the manufacturer placed in you at the moment of your origination. That has not been touched by anything you have experienced. It is waiting for you to access it every morning. Now, let me show you how to tell yourself these 5 things in a way that rewires the system at its operating foundation. The first 72 hours are the most important interval in this entire practice. In the first 72 hours of implementing this morning calibration sequence, your system will resist. This is expected, and it is not weakness, it is physics. A system that has been operating in a particular configuration for years will generate resistance against any attempt to recalibrate it. The resistance is not a sign that the new calibration is wrong. The resistance is a sign that the old configuration is defending itself. Understand this clearly. The discomfort of the first 72 hours is the sensation of recalibration in progress. It means the practice is working. Do not interpret discomfort as failure. In those first 72 hours, the practice must be performed with physical specificity before you pick up any device, before you speak to any person, before you consume any external content of any kind. You sit physically in a specific location you have designated for this purpose, and you issue the 5 calibration commands to your system, not quietly in your mind while lying in bed. Physically seated, eyes open or closed, voice either spoken aloud or issued in deliberate internal tone with full conscious attention behind each word. The physicality is not ceremonial, it is functional. Physical position activates different neural architectures than horizontal rest position. You are initiating a production run. Production runs do not begin in bed. Each command is held for a minimum of 60 seconds, not recited and immediately released. Held. After you state the command, you remain with it. You allow your system to process it. You observe the resistance that arises, and you do not negotiate with that resistance. You simply restate the command and hold it again. 60 seconds per command produces a minimum of 5 minutes of calibration time. This is not a significant time investment, but it is a non-negotiable one. You are not being asked to restructure your entire morning. You are being asked to protect 5 minutes of it from the noise that currently owns those minutes and has been producing the same compromised output year after year. In the 6-month cycle, the transformation becomes architectural rather than behavioral. 6 months of consistent morning calibration produces changes that are not merely in how you act. They are in how the system is structured. The neural pathways associated with purposelessness, circumstance-dependent identity, and dormant component inventory begin to weaken from disuse. The neural pathways associated with assignment awareness, dominion over the internal environment, and blueprint confidence begin to strengthen and consolidate. This is not metaphor. This is the documented response of biological neural architecture to repeated deliberate input. The system you repeatedly activate becomes the system that activates first. And the system that activates first determines the character of everything that follows it. By the end of the first 6-month cycle, you will notice that your default response to adversity has shifted. Not because adversity has become less real, but because your first pass processing of adversity now runs through the calibrated architecture rather than the uncalibrated one. The challenge enters the system. The system no longer defaults to victim processing. It defaults to assignment processing. What does this situation require of my design? What component in my inventory is relevant to this demand? What does my blueprint say about this specific territory? These are structurally different questions, and different questions always produce different outputs. At the 12-month marker, the calibration has become identity. You are no longer performing a practice. You have become the practice. The 5 commands are no longer instructions you issue each morning. They are the operating parameters of the system itself. This is the threshold where external observers begin to notice something different about you, not because you have changed your circumstances, but because you have changed your fundamental relationship to your circumstances. You carry a different frequency, and frequency is detectable. It influences the systems it comes into contact with. This is not mysticism. This is the observable behavior of any calibrated system operating within a network of interconnected systems. Now, let me apply the final reframe to every point of pain that exists anywhere in your history. Everything that broke you was testing the product. Hold that statement without rushing past it. Everything that broke you was testing the product. The manufacturer does not release a component into its operational environment without stress testing it fully and precisely to the boundary of its design limits. And stress testing is not gentle. It is deliberately designed to push the component to and frequently pass what appears to be its failure point. The purpose of that test is not to destroy the component. The purpose is to locate the actual failure threshold and to strengthen the component beyond that threshold before the component encounters those conditions in live deployment. The relationship that ended and left you reassembling your sense of identity that was a stress test. The financial collapse that forced you to rebuild your entire resource architecture from the ground up, that was a stress test. The health crisis that demonstrated the fragility of the physical system and simultaneously activated resilience mechanisms you did not know were installed, that was a stress test. The professional failure that exposed the gap between your current expression and your actual capability, that was a stress test. None of it was waste. All of it was data. And the data produced a more precise, more resilient, more fully calibrated component than comfort could have ever generated. This is the reframe that changes the relationship to pain permanently. Not the pain itself, the relationship to it. Pain without purpose is suffering. Pain understood as part of the manufacturing and certification process is something fundamentally different. It is investment. It is the cost paid for a level of operational capability that ease and approval could never have produced. You do not become a certified component by sitting in a climate control laboratory away from all real-world variables. You become certified by surviving the precise conditions that the live operational environment will actually require of you. And here is the final instruction that must remain architecturally embedded in your system long after this has ended. You are an original design, not an iteration of a previous model, not a variation on something the manufacturer has produced before. An original. The source does not replicate. Every component that emerges from the design flow of the manufacturer carries a unique configuration of blueprint, assignment, component inventory, intent, and operational specification. There is no other version of you. There is no second unit. There is no backup model waiting to perform your function. If you choose instead to perform someone else's, this is why comparison is the most destructive malware that can infect a human operating system. Comparison takes an original design and runs it against a benchmark that was never constructed for it. It is the equivalent of evaluating a cardiac cell against the performance standards written for a liver cell and concluding that the cardiac cell is deficient. The assessment is structurally invalid, but it produces the sensation of inadequacy in a system that does not recognize the invalidity of the benchmark. And once that sensation takes root, the system begins to suppress its unique expression and attempt to replicate the design it has decided is superior. The result is invariable, a failed imitation and a suppressed original. The world receives neither what it needed from you nor a credible version of the thing you try to become. Your assignment will not be fulfilled by the degree to which you successfully imitate what already exists. It will be fulfilled by the degree to which you fully, precisely, and unapologetically express the design that was placed in you and only you. That expression begins every morning with 5 calibration commands, with 5 minutes of protected stillness before the world makes its demand, with 5 deliberate instructions to a system that is waiting, has always been waiting for you to govern it with the authority you were given. The world does not need another copy of something it already has in abundance. The world needs the original you have been carrying and have not yet fully released. Every morning is another window of opportunity to release more of it. Every morning is a calibration that moves the needle of your expression, one deliberate increment closer to full specification. Do not waste it on noise. Do not surrender it to the urgency of external systems that will consume your morning without hesitation and return nothing of value in exchange for what they took. The system has been waiting for you to govern it. Begin governing it now. Be original, not a copy. Die empty.